Good evening and a very warm welcome to tonight's lecture and to Maastricht University. My name is Barbara Strating. I work as a program maker here at Studium Generale, but I'm also the curator of art at UM. And I'm therefore very happy that I'm here tonight. I was planning to be among you, to be part of the audience, but my co-worker who organized tonight fell ill this afternoon and now I'm taking over. A bit unprepared, but I don't think that does any harm to tonight because we have a wonderful lecture about making art and making money. I'm also very pleased that Jan-Dirk Batens is here with us. He is assistant professor at art history department at Radboud University. And actually, I was one of his students once, way back in time, which makes it even more exciting to be here tonight. Jan will give a lecture of about an hour, and this lecture is curated tonight especially to be part of the side program of the TEFAF, the European Fine Art Fair. And I'm just wondering, who is here because they are actually visiting Maastricht because of the TEFAF? Oh, that's wonderful. Very warm welcome to Maastricht University. As I said before, we'll have a lecture of about an hour and then we will have some time left for questions. So if you have any questions during the lecture, please make notes, raise your hand afterwards and I will join you with a microphone. But for now, give him a warm applause, Jan-Dirk Batens.
Thank you, Barbara, for that very kind introduction, and thank you all for being here. I'm very happy with the invitation, which I've accepted with great pleasure. Making art and making money. How do you like my first slide? The 3D effect of my name in Radboud University. Very cleverly done, isn't it? Right there. If anyone asks him or herself how you do that in PowerPoint, just ask me after the lecture. I've invested a few hours in arranging it. The subject of my lecture today is, of course, well, the relevance of the subject of my lecture today is quite evident since we've had the final day, I think, of TEFAF, the European Fine Art Fair, and I've just spent hours wandering through the fair. In fact, I've spent hours queuing first and then hours wandering through the fair, admiring all the beautiful works of art and spending millions, at least in my imagination. It will be hard waking up tomorrow morning realizing that I didn't get the Van Gogh after all. No, seriously, I was hoping to be able to show you something that I would have purchased at the fair, but the only thing I was able to buy was a cheese sandwich. And I was hungry, so I can't show it to you anymore. Anyway, wandering through TEFAF, wandering through any art fair these days feels a bit like time traveling, at least for a 19th century scholar as myself. The fair does not differ that much from art fairs organized back in the 19th century, certainly in the second half of the 19th century. Nil nove sub sole is Latin, so I'm informed. There is nothing new under the sun. And this, of course, brings me to the subject of my lecture. How modern is the modern art market? How was it created? How did it rise? And how did it become as successful as it is today? How new are the eye-watering prices paid for famous paintings? How new the sensational deals struck by agile dealers? How new the interconnectedness of the globalized art world? And as we will see, the contemporary art market is a preeminently modern phenomenon, but the history of modernity is a very long one indeed. People were modern or were becoming modern as long ago as the 16th century. And so the roots of the modern art market can be found back in the past, in 16th century Antwerp, in 17th century Amsterdam, in 18th century London, in 19th century Paris, and in 20th century New York. So what I propose to do today then is to trace this history of the modern art market back to the past and to try to understand how and why the art market looks the way it looks today. And I will do so with a focus mainly on the 19th century art market, because this is where my principal expertise lies, but also because the developments that led to the rise of the modern art market gained momentum at that time. Things moved ever quicker in the 19th century, of course, propelled ahead by gradual and eventually radical social, economic, and political developments. But let us begin first with the most basic of questions. When and why did an art market as we understand it today appear in the first place? Surely medieval artists like Jan van Eyck, I thought I'd take an example connected to Maastricht, right? Medieval artists like Jan van Eyck, they seemed perfectly happy and content with the traditional patronage of the Dukes of Burgundy. They wouldn't have dreamed of showing their work at TEFAF or any other art fair, and they were absolutely happy with the traditional patterns of patronage in their time. Well, to be quite honest, Jan van Eyck doesn't look very happy in this self-portrait, but I can make him a little bit happier. He's not doing anything, is he? Well, he's supposed to start smiling. I'm sorry, that was the best part of my lecture. Yet in what remains of Van Eyck's oeuvre, rather, we already see the roots of the modern art market. We see already what will become in later years the basis of the modern art world. For Van Eyck not only painted for the Dukes of Burgundy, not only painted for powerful ecclesiastics, he also made paintings for people of comparatively more recent ascendancy, merchants, for instance, like the Arnolfini family from Lucca in Italy. Now, of course, working for one such family alone will not make a difference for Van Eyck, but in due time, as time progresses, more Arnolfinis appeared, and still more. And still more. It was great fun making these slides as well. So a rising number of wealthy people who are eager to invest their money not only in horses, in city palaces, in new carriages and fancy clothes, but also in something that is indeed the ultimate luxury object, an object that one can do very well without, an object without any clear purpose, except that it provides beauty and entertainment and perhaps social prestige. Now, of course, these art objects, because that's what I'm talking about, they had some kind of purpose in the beginning, a religious purpose, for instance, but as time progresses, this purpose becomes increasingly an excuse for actually just buying and showing beautiful things. So the precondition for the growth and the development of the modern art market is the rise of a larger class of wealthy people, people with the financial means for a luxury lifestyle, eager to spend their money on useless and therefore prestigious goods like art. And indeed, if there is one continuous line in the history of the modern art market and its shifting geography, then it is this, that it follows people like the Arnolfini family, that art follows the money. It follows especially money of comparatively recent date, recently acquired wealth. And thus we see the first traces of an organized modern art market in 16th century Antwerp, then possibly the most important city in Western Europe. In fact, I'm from Antwerp myself, and we still believe that we are the most important city in Western Europe. Antwerp and the rest is parking. Antwerp and the rest is the parking lot is a very often heard saying in our city. Of course, Antwerp was indeed a major economic and cultural center, and it was a city where money poured in as rain pours generally in the Low Countries. So what we have in Antwerp is a very quickly growing group of excessively rich people interested in purchasing art. And that leads to the development of two distinct but also very interconnected phenomena. First, we see that artists start working for an anonymous, a free market, no longer being commissioned to make or to produce specific works of art for people they already know, but rather opting to work for possible future buyers that they haven't yet met when they are making their art. So to anyone really who might be interested. Secondly, we also see the establishment of specialized shops in Antwerp, shops specialized in the sale of luxury objects, luxury furniture, but also prints and paintings. The shops were, and this is quite striking, they were established in a special gallery in the building you see right there, the first stock exchange in Europe, the Antwerp Bourse or Beurs. Where there was a special gallery that accommodated 100 specialized picture shops, 100 specialized shops for art dealers. Of course, we all know what happened with Antwerp in 1585, when the Spaniards recaptured the city and the money left Antwerp, and it left Antwerp to go up north to Amsterdam. And this is again where new wealth creates new possibilities for the modern art market, and where new innovations are also developed in order to structure and organize the expanding art market of the time. New wealth creates enormous possibilities in 17th century Antwerp. Virtually everybody, virtually every household had at least one painting in its house. Only the poorest of the poor didn't. And what we see in 17th century Amsterdam is that increasingly specialized people called art dealers, of course, stepped in, buying works from painters and reselling them to collectors, or buying them at auctions and reselling them to collectors. In the 18th century, Amsterdam's commercial and cultural prominence petered out, and new cities took over the lead in the development of the art market. 18th century London, for instance, where James Christie and his colleagues invented or almost invented the modern auction house. But also 19th century London, where hugely enterprising, entrepreneurial, and innovative art dealers made a market that was worth millions of pounds and developed all kinds of new marketing strategies in the process, effectively creating an enormous art bubble. One of these very famous art dealers, and I'll refer to him a couple of times during this lecture, is actually Belgian, man you see here, called Ernest Gambart, who established himself as a dealer in the late 1840s, rose to prominence in the 1850s, promoting contemporary painting, both British and European continental, so Dutch, Belgian, and French mainly. And the man made absolute fortunes. After a career of hardly 25 years, he retired. He bought this huge house at the Côte d'Azur in Nice, chock full of paintings, and he lived a very pleasant life of dinner parties, music parties, and looking at his own art collection. London in the 18th and the 19th centuries, but then of course also Paris, which is at the time Europe's cultural heart, and also the preeminent breeding ground of modern innovative art that requires a new approach to the art market. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. But then, by the late 19th century, again, the geography shifts, this time over the Atlantic, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, attracted by the huge fortunes that are being built in the United States. Here you see Samuel Avery, an American art dealer, crossing the Atlantic Ocean with crates full of expensive European painting, but also silverware, porcelain, and so on. And even more telling, I guess, is this cartoon where you see John Pierpont Morgan, one of the crazy billionaires at the time, with this huge dollar sign as a magnet, attracting all the treasures from Europe, all sold, of course, well, not all of them, but in part sold by the impoverished aristocracy in Europe, Downton Abbey, those kinds of places, and all now in these large and rich American museums. New York is, of course, still extremely important in the geography of the art market, and more recently, China can be added to this chronology where new wealth again creates new demand for art. So this is then, in a tiny nutshell, the changes that created the modern art market. And we can then have a closer look at what is then so special, so characteristic about this modern art market. What are the special characteristics that make it distinct of earlier markets? And I will focus here today on 4 of these special characteristics, all of them interconnected with each other. Firstly, the growing mobility in the art market. Secondly, the increased anonymous character of the art market. In the third place, the growing importance of professional intermediaries, of agents and dealers. And finally, the growing importance of information in the modern art market. Interestingly, these 4 characteristics can be found back in this quite famous painting by the Dutch-British painter Laurens Alma-Tadema, a painting he actually made for Ernest Gambart, the London-based dealer that I've mentioned earlier. The painting doesn't quite show a 19th century Victorian art gallery, or does it? Because what Tadema paints are Victorians in disguise. He situates his scenes in the Roman or the classical Greek past, but behind the togas and behind the decoration, people are in fact expected to see their own time, which is 19th century London. So what we see here is a Victorian art gallery in disguise. It is in fact probably Gambart's own gallery situated at 121 Pall Mall in London, the so-called French gallery where Gambart made fortunes. To the annoyance, by the way, of some art critics of the time who discussed this painting in their reviews of the exhibition where it was on display, complaining, and this is a quote, that Roman art galleries weren't as filled as this gallery with paintings from floor to ceiling, as if then, as now, artists only painted to bring bread to their dealers. What we are seeing then is Gambart's own art gallery, and Gambart in fact is present at the very heart of his gallery. I'll now try this pointer. The man right here in the middle is no one else but Ernest Gambart himself. And he's surrounded by his colleagues and employees. Right here, Charles Descamps, his nephew who worked for him in the gallery. Next to him, you can only see half of his head, his friend Henry Wallace, and here in the back, Pilgrim and Lefebvre, again, two of Gambard's employees who took over the gallery in later years. This picture tells us something about the art market in the 1870s. First of all, it tells us something about mobility, the first characteristic of the modern art market. In the Roman art gallery, rather, as depicted by Tadema, we see world-famous paintings collected from all over the Roman Empire. The Battle of Issus on the left, for example, the sacrifice of Iphigenia on the right, a famous portrait of Medea. In other words, the most famous works of art from antiquity all shipped to the Roman art gallery depicted by Tadema, an upmarket gallery in ancient Rome, the center of power and the place of big money at the time. And no doubt, Rome attracted an irresistible amount of art and artists. And in fact, we know that some of the works depicted by Tadema in this picture gallery were at the time purchased by very rich Roman citizens, including Julius Caesar, at the time for huge amounts of money. Secondly, the painting signals the new anonymous character of the art market. Painters and buyers, painters and collectors rarely know each other, let alone know each other in an intimate way. There are indeed no artists present in this gallery, just a dealer and a couple of collectors. And the artist made this picture without knowing who will eventually buy it, so the market has become anonymous. Thirdly, we see here the rising importance in that anonymous market of middlemen or middlewomen, dealers and agents who mediate between artists and collectors, who buy and resell, promote the interests of artists they represent or collectors they represent. Gambard here is at the very center of the gallery, keeping things alive, making the business. Finally, the picture signals the vital importance in this new configuration of the modern art market of information. In a massively expanded art world where buyers and sellers, artists and collectors, no longer know each other, buy and sell across borders as well, information is crucial. It's crucial that you have knowledge, that you share knowledge, that you know what you're selling or that you know what you're buying, and that you can exchange this information. That the deal, in other words, can take place on the basis of reliable, on the basis of trustworthy information. So information, in other words, is the oil in the machine. It's the lubricant required by the market to run smoothly, and it still is today. Well, dealers tell me it's both information and champagne, so that's the two things you need to have a deal, information and champagne. Certainly, Gambard was very busy promoting or giving information. He published these catalogs, one of which you can see here, where he gave his potential buyers, collectors, information on the goods in his stock. And in the picture, in fact, I'll go back, Gambard is very busy explaining to his visitors what they can see on the painting. Whoops, what am I doing? What they can see on the painting here, a painting by Apelles, by the way, on the easel in front of them. Gambard is explaining everything about them, and at the same time, and this is a joke by Tadema, watching the only woman in the gallery, which is a portrait of his mistress at the time. Okay, let us try to further unpack these four characteristics, and I'll try to do that in part based on my own research. Firstly, mobility. The geographical expansion of the art world was accompanied by increased mobility, an increased mobility of goods, of money and people. It's almost like the European Union, right? It's free transfer of goods, people, and money. Goods, money, and people have, of course, always moved, and so has art. Surely Rome attracted thousands of works of art and hundreds of thousands of people, but there is a sharp increase in the possibilities of mobility in the 19th century, in part, of course, caused by the so-called transport revolution, which started as early as the 18th century and stimulated the intra-European trade, encouraged exchange between regional and national markets. So dealers, collectors, connoisseurs, and so on were able to remain aware of developments and things happening in faraway places. They traveled due to improvements to the transportation infrastructure, which facilitated the possibilities of travel, information networks that tightened and made it possible to exchange information with your network, postal services that became more efficient, commercial telegraphy later on. All these developments allowed easier communication and easier travel. 19th century newspapers and periodicals were on the rise as a result of improved printing processes and new commercial business models as well. They reached international audiences in different countries at the same time. And it was especially the expanding middle class, so newly acquired people with newly acquired wealth, rather these middle classes that benefited the most from easier and less expensive access to goods, travel, and information across national borders. They visited museums, they visited exhibitions abroad, they subscribed to national and foreign newspapers and periodicals. They bought works of art in their own country or when visiting other countries as tourists. And this, of course, creates huge possibilities for both dealers and artists. Dealers start exploring the international potential of the art market. Gambard, whom I've just mentioned, he calls his gallery at first the French gallery because he markets academic French art, 19th century academic French art in Great Britain. He imports it and then resells it at a higher price. But other dealers went further afield. This is someone from my own research, Belgian art dealer, son of an Antwerp artist who moved to New York in United States in the early 1850s with the idea of setting up an art gallery in New York. The United States are seen back in Europe as quite underdeveloped in terms of the commercial art market, and there are huge commercial possibilities there for enterprising European dealers. So Ferdinand de Brakeler Jr. starts importing work made by friends and students of his father, the Antwerp painter. He imports them using the direct steamship lines between continental Europe, Britain as well, of course, and New York. sets up his own gallery. He promotes his stuff in newspapers and periodicals in New York, trying to make a reputation, trying to make a name for himself and for his artists in this hugely promising new market. In fact, he even succeeds in convincing the Belgian government to invest in his business. He gets a subsidy for the Belgian government of a few thousand francs at the time, because the Belgian government sees possibilities here. They see a huge country, they see an economy that is on the rise, they see growing wealth among these factory owners and bankers in the US, and they think that it is very promising for the Belgian art world as well. Collectors as well, they adopt this international perspective. They travel, they visit exhibitions abroad. American tourists, for instance, they come to Paris often for the world exhibitions, but also on other occasions. They visit exhibitions and they want to buy the art that they see, or at least similar art to what they see in the exhibitions. And local dealers, they try to lure these visitors, they try to lure these tourists to their galleries. The famous French art dealer Paul Durand-Ruel, for instance, he's very famous because he's marketed the Impressionist artists, the Impressionist painters. He complains in his memoirs that his own gallery, the Galerie Durand-Ruel, was not located on the very popular Boulevard Montmartre, where all the tourists came strolling, but a bit further in the Rue Lafitte, so that he wasn't able to pull these people into his gallery. And indeed, the biggest late 19th century American collections by William Vanderbilt, for instance, they boasted the best works by living Belgian, Dutch, German, French, Spanish, and Italian artists. And it's not just the American or the Northern American billionaires. You'd be surprised, even rich people from Argentina, for instance, from Buenos Aires, they went to Paris, went shopping there, and came back with dozens of fashionable French paintings in their luggage. Collectors became aware of the international expansion of the art market, dealers became aware of it, and of course, artists also became aware of it. They saw the commercial opportunities abroad and tried to adapt their work accordingly. And this is just one example, but I could give dozens of them. A Belgian painter called Victor-Jules Génisson, a specialist in church interiors, not very famous anymore today. He seeks contact with people he knows in London because he's eager to explore the riches available in London to try to benefit from it himself. And he writes in one of his letters to a contact of his in London that, this is a quote, "I hardly believe that your rich country would not be able to provide any resources for me. In a city like London, they are inexhaustible." So that's the idea. It's El Dorado. Everybody is sitting on a huge pile of money there, and anyone can sell his paintings there. But of course, in order to do that, you have to adapt your taste, you have to adapt your work, rather, to local taste. So Génisson asks in one of his letters, what do people in London actually like? What would they like to buy? And he realizes that they're not as much interested in church interiors, in the interior of the Antwerp Cathedral, but rather in the interior of Westminster Abbey. So he travels to London and starts painting church interiors there. Adapting his work to local taste, and following thus in the footsteps of someone like David Roberts, a British specialist in church of church interiors. And in another letter, Génisson writes, well, where Roberts has harvested richly I'm happy to glean in his footsteps, so I'm happy with the leftovers of Roberts. The effects today of this expansion and mobility, increased mobility of goods and people, need hardly mentioned. TEFAF today has 260 prestigious dealers from 20 countries, representing artists, I think, from virtually every corner of the world. This increased mobility and this expansion is closely related to a second development, the anonymization of the art market. Quite simply put, the larger the group of people, the less these people know each other. I was hoping that we would only be 4 or 5 here today and we would be in friendly terms after now. We would probably go out and have a beer and stay in touch afterwards, but there are too many of you, so it's impossible to know all of you today. In other words, the lecture market, the market for lectures such as this one, has become an anonymous market. And the same is true for the 19th century art market. Because of the huge growth of the art market and of the art world at large, it became more anonymous. Traditional patronage, of course, still exists. You would commission a portrait of yourself, in this case, of your beloved deceased husband, by a painter you know. You would have personal contact with the painter, but very often your engagement with art takes place on an anonymous basis. You would go to exhibitions, see works of art, but you would rarely be in contact, in personal contact with the artist who made these works of art, and you would purchase works of art, generally not from the artist, him or herself, but rather through a dealer. That means, of course, that exhibitions become increasingly important for artists, because in order to reach the anonymous audience, the potential client base, the group of people that they no longer know in person, they have to find other means to show their work, to make their work accessible, knowable by the public at large. And this gives rise to a new kind of artist called the exhibition artist. An artist who thinks strategically about participating to exhibitions, what exhibitions to choose, what kinds of work to show in these exhibitions in order to stand out amongst thousands of other works of art. On the right-hand side here, you see a typical view of a contemporary art exhibition at the time, boasting in Paris 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 works of art at the same time. In the Netherlands or in Belgium, more in the range of 1,000 to 2,000. And then on the left-hand side, someone who didn't quite succeed in standing out, whose career is broken. So that also means that the exhibition landscape changes. Artists try to find new ways to show their work in new exhibition formats, for instance, not in these huge art shows or fairs, but rather in smaller group exhibitions, elite exhibitions in commercial galleries, solo shows, the formats that we still know today in, let's say, the commercial galleries in Amsterdam, for instance, are developed then in the late 19th century. And in that sense, the market as a more abstract concept becomes increasingly important. Artists, so the story goes, they free themselves from the shackles of traditional patronage. They are no longer compelled to listen to the Dukes of Burgundy or to other patrons. They can do as they please. Yet, while freeing themselves of these shackles, they are also put into new shackles again, because they have to listen to the taste of the audience, of the market as a more abstract concept. They have to follow fashions, they have to adapt their work to what this huge anonymous potential client base wants, with all the risks involved indeed. Here you see a crowd of people, that's the anonymous art market, a crowd of people gathered together, however, to buy sausages from the butcher rather than to buy pictures from the art shop on the left-hand side, which is empty and leads to the bankruptcy of the arts. And here again, I think it is clear that what we see today at TEFAF is the outcome of this development. Tens of thousands of visitors, most of whom don't know each other, don't know the artists in person, often don't know the dealers in person. And I was just talking with a dealer earlier today who told me the most important thing here at TEFAF is meeting new people, meeting potential new collectors who are not yet part of your regular client base. And that brings me indeed to the third characteristic of the modern art market, the crucial role played by art dealers. The rise to power of these art dealers dates back to the early days of the modern art market. And it's a very logical rise, isn't it? The expansion of the art market, which is increasingly anonymous, creates a need for people standing in the middle, middlemen and middlewomen to a lesser degree, but they existed, agents, mediators, who stand between the collectors on the one hand and the artists on the other hand, and who take care of an efficient transfer of information, of goods, and of money. Samuel Avery, for instance, the guy you saw on a ship crossing the Atlantic, is here explaining something about a European picture to a very wealthy American female collector. Now, art dealers have existed for quite a while in the 19th century, but they also radically professionalized at that time. And they became central players in the art world in different ways. Firstly, these dealers start taking the careers of living artists in their hands, binding artists on a more or less exclusive basis to them, building their careers, promoting them, bringing them to new collectors, making their prices rise, taking care of official recognition, and so on and so forth. The most famous example is the example of Paul Durand-Ruel, who promoted these innovative artists called the Impressionists that nobody was really interested in, that nobody wanted to buy. Durand-Ruel took them in his stable, promoted their careers, and the result is that today in the most prestigious museums all over Europe and the US, you see the Impressionist works hanging. Another example, and this is one of my own research, is the example of Gustave Couteau. Not a very famous dealer, but a very successful one in his own time. Couteau is a banker, a very wealthy banker, and he tries to apply commercial, financial banking strategies, tries to transfer them to the world of art. So what he does is he enters into written agreements, exclusive written agreements with a number of artists who are tied to him by these agreements for a number of years. And some of the artists, right, you see on the slide, of course. For Couteau, this was important because it secured him of a steady flow of works of art. And it also secured him of the possibility of buying these works of art against the same prices. They would agree on the prices at the beginning of the contract, and these prices would remain the same for a number of years. In the meantime, Couteau could start promoting these artists, for instance, convincing newspapers or periodicals to write favorably about their art, which would make prices rise, and he would then be able to resell the works of art against a higher profit margin. He could still buy them from the artist against the initially low prices, but the profit margin would become higher and higher. These exclusive agreements were crucial for such a strategy, but other strategies were necessary as well. For instance, Couteau tried to monitor the auction market. It was always a risk that collectors would resell their work, throw it out and sell it at auction, but here it was essential that prices would be sustained, because if a collector had bought a painting for a high price, but it would not obtain the same high price at auction, then collectors would be reluctant to buy new work against such a high price. So the prices had to be sustained, which means that the dealer buys the works of art of his artist at these auctions against high prices, often bidding against himself, so asking several people to make bids in order to obtain a high price that is then publicly accessible as well at these auctions. He also took care of other things, of the press especially. Favorable reviews were very important, of course, in order for artists to create a reputation, and a reputation also meant higher prices. So dealers like Couteau, they wooed art critics, or they paid art critics, gave them little presents so that art critics would publish favorable reviews on their artists. They would also make friends with prestigious collectors. In Belgium, that would be the king, for instance, or people from the high aristocracy. They would get slightly lower prices, but of course then a week later you would see in the press that the king or the Duke of whatever, Antwerp, doesn't exist, the Duke of Brabant, would have made this purchase, and other collectors would probably be eager to start buying themselves. Now, in other words, this is what happens. Couteau keeps buying the works of art against a comparatively modest price, but as the prices of his resale rise, because he promotes these careers, his profit margin becomes larger and larger as well. Dealers also increasingly become arbiters of taste. They start telling people what is good art and what isn't good art. And they do so because in the course of the 19th century, people start realizing that absolute aesthetic value in art doesn't exist. Fashions come and fashion go, prices rise and prices go down, and thus dealers try to present themselves as the people who know what will become important again. And this, of course, creates huge possibilities for speculation. If you can buy things that are not in fashion, make them fashionable or make them fashionable again, that means that you can resell again with very high profit margins. Buy cheap, sell high is, I think, the motto of the art market. And finally, dealers can also vouch for the authenticity of works of art. If you're buying art the most important thing for many collectors, many buyers, is that the work of art is real, of course. And this was a problem in the art market, still is a problem in the art market. But in the early 19th century, it was a very big problem, in part because rich British tourists who went to Rome and the rest of Italy, they were often deceived by local dealers, and they all came back with tons of Leonardos and Titians and Michelangelos and Raphaels. At a time, there wasn't an auction in London at Christie's where not at least 15 Leonardos were offered for sale, in part because people didn't have the knowledge, but also in part because of plain deception. So guaranteeing the authenticity of works of art is increasingly important, both for dealers selling old masters as for dealers selling the work of contemporary artists. When my Antwerp dealer moves to New York, he realizes that authenticity is crucial for American collectors because they've been deceived for decades by local and European dealers. There is one story of this New York-based dealer in old master paintings who sold thousands of paintings, but according to legend, not a single authentic old master painting amongst them. So when my Antwerp dealer who starts working in New York presents his collection in this catalog, he stresses in the introduction that authenticity is key. I quote, "No one is so little protected against imitation and plagiarism as the artist, a circumstance which injures his reputation as well as his material interests. Some judge the master by a copy and others abstain from purchasing on account of having been so often deceived. So, to avoid any such occurrence and to convince the public of the authenticity of each painting, the proprietor of this collection, the dealer, provides himself with a sealed certificate written by the hand of the master by whom each picture is painted." So he asks all the Belgian painters who are working for them to write and sign a certificate that he can also give to the American collector so that they're certain that what they are buying is real. And this brings me to the final characteristic of the modern art market, the essential role of knowledge and information. Information is crucial in the art market, but it can work in different ways. On the one hand, there is information asymmetry. This is what allows profit to be made in the art market. For instance, because I know and you don't know that a painting I saw last week in a back street in Venice was painted by a famous Italian primitive, I can acquire it cheaply and then resell it for a very high price. That's information asymmetry. Somebody knows something that other people don't know. That's the dream of every dealer, to have a sleeper, to find a sleeper, right? Something somewhere hidden on an attic by an old lady or something, and is then suddenly recognized as a genuine Rembrandt. On the other hand, there is also something called information efficiency. And that means that all the players in the art market must have or must be able to have more or less the same kind of information and thereby consider the same information components to be important. If there is no information to be found anywhere about that famous Italian primitive to whom I assigned the painting that I found, no one will be convinced to buy it from me for 100,000 euros. So we must all have some agreement on what painters are important, what art is good, and what art isn't good. And otherwise, the deal will fall through. Now, if we look at 19th century images of people engaging with art, you see that they're almost all the time not just looking at art, but also reading about it and talking to each other. In other words, they're exchanging information. They're reading in newspapers or in catalogs or little booklets what they're looking at, and they're talking to each other about the things that they see and the things that they read. And indeed, there is a very close link to the growth and the professionalization of the art market in the 19th century and the production of knowledge, the production of information in every possible form. Most obvious, of course, in art criticism, published in 19th century newspapers, periodicals, specialized magazine, and it is known very well how artists were always, well then as now, eager to have favorable reviews. Here is a very powerful critic strolling through an exhibition, and all the artists, you can always recognize artists in 19th century prints because they have long hair and beards. They're all saluting him, all being very, very courteous to him in order to get a favorable review. I'll skip this one. But art information also takes, information about art takes on different forms. You can also find it, for instance, in handbooks for interior decoration, where people would learn how to decorate their houses, what historical or revivalist styles would fit what kind of room, and what paintings, what type of paintings would go well in these rooms. But even in a more scholarly sense, information about art has always been very closely related to the art market. The catalogue raisonné, for instance, is a standard format of art historical information. It provides an overview of the life, the career, life and career of an artist, as well as a complete catalogue of the works of art produced by this artist. Well, the very idea of making such a catalogue raisonné came from an art dealer called John Smith. Well, obviously, the commercial opportunities created by the existence of such a catalogue raisonné are very important. The idea of classifying art in national schools, the Dutch school, the Belgian school, the German school, and so on, that idea as well was launched in the art trade by an art dealer called Lebrun, working in France, and just for the petite histoire, married to a very famous female artist, Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun. And because we're in the Netherlands, even the promotion of forgotten artists was often in part determined by commercial motives. Johannes Vermeer was virtually unknown in 19th century France until this guy, Théophile Thoré, famous art historian and art critic, put him back on the map with a series of publications. Yet at the same time, Thoré also bought and resold 17th century Dutch paintings, so he wasn't a disinterested scholar, he was also a commercial player active in the field. And this one I'll skip. Okay, so to conclude, how modern is the modern art market? It's modern, yes, but modernity has a long history. So in a sense, it's hardly more modern than the early modern sold at TEFAF. Email and WhatsApp have replaced letters and telegrams. The aeroplane, the private jet in the case of TEFAF, has replaced the steamship. The internet, for a part, has replaced the catalogue raisonné. But the market and the mechanisms behind it, well, they continue to work, I think, largely as they have been working for a very long time now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan Dirk. I think we have some time left for questions. Are there any questions? Well, then I have some questions, obviously. When we talk about the contemporary art market, we're also talking about the internet, obviously, and also NFTs, which is this new branch of artworks where the artwork itself completely exists within the internet. Is it something you consider a new branch at the art world, or is it just same old, same old?
That's a good question. It's new in the sense that it's a direct product of technology kind of technology that was not available, well, even 20 years ago, I gather. But it's not so new, I think, in the sense that it's a very speculative thing. Many people engaged in this type of work engage in it, I think, with speculative purposes. And that is something that is absolutely very closely connected to the rise of that modern art market as a capitalist mechanism. So I'm very curious I'm very curious to know what will happen with these NFTs in 10 or 20 years, whether it will be just another art bubble, as we've seen in the 19th century, well, there are many instances in the 19th century of artificially created art bubbles with people investing and then prices falling. And well, I'll be very curious to see what will happen there.
Any other questions? Yes, and let me start in the front of the room.
Do you think with the information so easily available, is it still possible to have an advantage as a dealer, because you can find out anything very quickly? Prices and price levels are very easily to found.
Yeah.
Is that still relevant now?
Well, I do think it's still relevant, but it's become much more complicated. Indeed, what I hear from dealers is that it's a problem for them that especially auction results are publicly available in a very, very easy way. So they prefer buying works from private collectors rather than buying works at auction, because if you buy them from private collectors, then others won't know what you have paid for the works yourself. So in that sense, it's a problem. But I do think that dealers with a very specialized expertise can still make a difference, in the sense that they will spot works of art of exceptional quality, be able possibly to recognize the work of artists that will able to recognize the hand of the master in unsigned paintings, and that kind of thing. Other than that, it's also, of course, part of the magic of the art market. If a dealer has said, yes, this is a very good painting, and this is where the arbiter of taste comes in. If a dealer has bought it at auction and then says it's a very, very important painting, and imbibes the work of art with the prestige tied to this specific dealer, then collectors are almost naturally prepared to buy a higher price for it, because the dealer has said that it's a very good painting. So it's also part of the magic, I think.
Does it then also matter that, for instance, a museum says that it's a really good artist? Like, does that raise prices when an artist has a solo exhibition, for instance, at a contemporary art museum?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yes. If you get your work in an important collection, a prestigious dealer or a prestigious museum, that gives your market value a huge boost. This is why living artists today are prepared to ask lower prices when they sell to museums, and this already happens in the 19th century. Alma Tadema, the artist that I mentioned, he started donating works of art by the end of his career, because he was increasingly aware of the fact that his art was becoming outdated, and he was increasingly worried that he would be forgotten. So he's not really creating a market there, but he's already thinking ahead about the persistence of the value of his art, and the importance of getting your art in the most prestigious places available, which is huge collections of very rich collectors and prestigious museums.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for the artists, is it still important to have dealers or galleries because they have the internet, all the information is available? So maybe for collectors it's easy to go to a gallery. An artist can do, well, its own, how do you say, selling.
Yeah, but there are. Yes, the artist can sell his or her own work, but firstly, artists rarely have the networks that galleries or dealers have. Artists are, and this is a bit of a cliche, but I also think it's perhaps a little bit true. Well, not all the artists, I'll try to phrase this more moderately. Not all the artists have the business acumen that dealers have. And often they're also not very motivated or interested in the commercial. I mean, it takes a lot of energy to make a sale, to court possible buyers. One of the artists that I've been researching in relation to this banker dealer in Belgium, he's able to get rid of his exclusive agreement, so to earn a lot more money by selling his work directly to the richest of the richest. But in the end, he decides to stay with his dealer, and he writes in his letters, you know me, I'm not good at bookkeeping, and all these people visiting my studio wanting to talk with me, I'm fed up with it. You just do it, and it's okay if you get your 50% commission, as long as I don't have to do business with the collector. So that plays a role as well.
Well, you say you talk a lot about that the art market is anonymous, yes, but because the artist don't know the buyer personally, and the buyer don't know the artist personally. But in fact, if you look at the art market, the name and the personality of the artist, who he is, plays an enormous important role, I think. So you say, oh, this is a Rembrandt and this is a Van Gogh, and so you name the quality by the name. So is that not? Does this not mean that it's a really personalized market, but perhaps in a more or less asymmetric way, because the artist is famous, the buyer not, but because the buyers are rich, they get almost quite famous, in fact.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, absolutely. When saying that the art market is anonymous, I mainly mean that the artist who is creating a work of art doesn't know in advance who he is creating the work of art for. He doesn't know in advance who will buy it. Of course, afterwards also they may possibly meet, although of course Damien Hirst, who's sold thousands of works of art, he has not met all these collectors. But yes, the name is of crucial importance, and this is also what leads to the existence today of these celebrity artists who are very concerned about their image, about their reputation, who try to hang out as well with celebrities, with Hollywood actors, for instance, who try to appear in glossies or in newspapers, well, maybe that's a phenomenon that has been. That is the result as well of the modern anonymous art market, because if you don't know the painter, if you don't know the artist, then the name has to be big. There has to be a reputation. There has to be it has to be someone well known, not just an artist you know, but you want to tell your friends that you've bought a Damien Hirst, and you want to make sure that they all know Damien Hirst. So the idea of a celebrity artist, someone who visits celebrity parties and who gets a lot of media coverage, is also, I think, closely connected to this rise in the course of the 19th century of the modern art market.
Hi, thank you. I really liked your talk. For me, like a key takeaway on your talk is this continuing historical legacy of the art market. Like lots of similarities you see in the 19th century are still happening now, right? I understood you correctly?
Yep.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the financialization of the art market. And by this, I mean the recognition of art as a financial asset. And if you think that has any significant impacts or changes on the art market.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a process that also gets underway. Of course, I'm a 19th century person, so I think that everything was created in the 19th century. But nevertheless, I do think that that's a process that gets underway in the 19th century. And it gets a lot of negative critical attention as well. For instance, there are reports in the press where art critics complain about the way that people talk nowadays about art. And then he gives an example. For instance, they complain that people are, when they talk about art, they only talk about prices. And in fact, when they talk about prices for art, they talk about art as if they are values on the stock exchange. So, for instance, the work of Stevens, a painter, has risen with 30%, and the work of another painter has fallen with 30% or 40%. And you also see a new type of collector arising at the time, a collector with speculative interests. So not someone who just wants to surround him or herself with beautiful things or things he or she takes pleasure in, but who really buys in order to resell against higher prices. They're part of the art market is hugely speculative at the time. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes, I think of art academies. And I also think that the people who learn to make beautiful art like to earn their living. So, is it so that the knowledge, the skills to put your art in the society, is it a subject? And if not, what skills have to be learned in that subject? And is it to be learned?
You mean at art academies, how to...
Yeah, I see an artist, a young artist.
Yeah.
He has to get those skills, or is it just a matter of luck?
Well, these skills aren't taught at all at 19th century art academics, for sure. Partly because commerce is dirty. It's not. You shouldn't talk about money. You shouldn't talk about the commercial dimension of art, and certainly not at an art academy where the myth that beauty is in a completely separate realm, distinct from the ugly world of commerce, which is in part why dealers become so important. They can talk prices, and the artist can continue to act as if he's only or she's only interested in creating beauty and poetry and all that. So you absolutely can't learn it at art academies, and this has continued, I think, until at least the early 21st century. Nowadays, at least in some academies, in the Netherlands, for instance, students get introductory courses on how they should organize themselves business-wise. But even then, in other academies, it's still being frowned upon. This is not for us. We're just here to talk about art. But I do agree with the first thing that you said. I think art and earning the salt on your bread, well, they have to be combined. They're not mutually exclusive.
Okay, thank you.
I also would like to talk about patronage, and especially government funding, because one of the things that in Dutch academies, they do not exactly learn you how to be a businessman, but at least you have an introductory class into applying for government funding. From your talk, I took that there wasn't like subsidies available in the 19th century, so I think it's a invention of the late 20th century, or at least after World War II. But I was wondering, where should you put it within like the realm of the marketing of art? Because I also noticed that when an artist applies for instance, Mondrian funding, and they get the funding, that immediately their value rises.
Yeah, that kind of subsidies indeed didn't exist in the 19th century, but there were alternatives or similar things. You could earn medals if you're an important artist and you show a fantastic work of art. Well, fantastic in the eyes, of course, of government officials at an exhibition. You could get a medal with a financial award as well of 2,000 or 3,000 francs, and this would immediately make your market price rise. For instance, we know of late 19th century American collectors that they are mainly interested in buying artists who have earned medals back in France, in Paris especially, which is the most prestigious place to earn medals. And when when dealers start exporting works of art from Europe to America, they ask their artists, please, if you make contact with a collector in America, please mention all your awards, all your medals, all your official positions, because they're crazy about that, and that makes market value rise. The other thing is that in some countries, at least, governments, national governments, but also local and regional governments sometimes bought art as they do. Not in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands, well, there was not a lot of money in the 19th century for art, and it was also not government policy to invest a lot directly in the arts, at least. But in France and in Belgium, there were a lot of acquisitions by the government, and here again, that made your market value rise as well.
Just out of curiosity, whom in the audience is either an art dealer or an art buyer? And is there anyone who would like to talk about like their position within like everything we learned tonight? Because I also can imagine that it is something that you are quite private about, right? No. Are you an arts dealer or an art buyer? Okay.
My question is how expensive art, in fact, is now and was, let's say, a century ago or 2 centuries ago. If you take, for instance, Rembrandt, yes, and you measure it at, let's say, the year income of a police officer. Yes, that seems to me a quite good measurement. Well, how expensive then is Rembrandt now? Was it in the 19th century? Was it in the 18th century? Is there any knowledge about that? Yeah.
There are prices available, for instance, in auctions where work by Rembrandt was auctioned off. It's very hard, because it's very good that you already compare with the annual income of a certain specific kind of person, because it's very hard to compare prices because, you know, the price of bread or the price of labor, well, there were different balances between these prices. For Rembrandt, I cannot tell you, I don't know, but for Vermeer and these more modest 17th century genre painters, Pieter de Hoog, Vermeer, those kinds of artists, back in the 1860s, 1870s, you could buy a painting for well, maybe 5,000–6,000 francs, and that would be, I don't know what a policeman earns, to be honest, but that would be, say, the example I usually give is the director of a school. So he would have perhaps 3,000 francs a year, but a rich merchant or a banker, not the absolute upper crust, but just a rich with, you know, 2 or 3 servants in his house, he could have an annual income of 20,000 francs. So he would be able to buy a painting by Pieter de Hoog or Vermeer. But then, of course, you see these prices. They're very volatile. The example I usually give to my students is the prices for Alma Tadema, because he has, well, the prices were crazy when he was alive, and then they completely dropped, and now they're crazy again. So one of his most famous paintings, a very large one, The Finding of Moses, he sold it, I think, for £5,000 to John Aird, a very rich engineer. £5,000 would be 100,000 francs. So that's 20 paintings by de Hoog. And then by the 1920s, nobody was interested in Alma Tadema anymore. And the same painting was, when was it? I think in the 1930s or 1940s, was sold in New York for maybe $3,000, very, very cheap. And then apparently, according to legend at least, the dealer found, after making the sale, he found the painting again in the little alley next to his gallery, because actually the buyers were only interested in the picture frame, so they had left the painting standing there. And then the painting came at auction again 10 or 15 years ago, and it went for £25 million. So speculation is worth the trouble, I guess, if you can predict these fluctuations in prices.
But is it speculation within a lifetime, or is it something you would buy for your
You can speculate for your children.
Jan, final question. The European Fine Arts Fair is still here for 3 upcoming days. If you would give any advice to the audience if they will visit in the upcoming days, what is it they should look for? Like, what is special about the TEFAF that you can't see anywhere in another museum or another art fair?
Well, 2 things, I think. First, ask the dealers to be allowed to touch stuff, pretend to be very rich and take off the well, ask first, of course, but then take off the drawings and the pictures, look at the backside and so on. So that's one thing. And the second thing, look at the people. That's what people did in the 19th century. When they were visiting these huge art fairs and exhibitions, they were there for several reasons. Some people just wanted to look at the art. Some men wanted to look at the women visiting the exhibitions. They write about it in their diaries. And the other people just wanted to watch other people. And that's really fun at TEFAF as well.
Okay, well, good advice for the upcoming 3 days. Thank you very much, Jan-Dirk Batens. And thank you very much for being here tonight and for joining us for this lecture tomorrow.